like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Like It's 1999, the podcast where we talk about the films of 1999, forming our own little throuple here in 2022. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny Neibart.
And I'm Phil Iskov.
And with us today is the legend, the man who does our artwork and our incredible theme. He's also a friend of Phil's from way back and has a lot of thoughts about him. Jaan Kittask. I know you've been on this before, but first time with me. That's what matters, obviously. Take that, Apple Reviews.
Kenny, I'm very happy to meet you. Excited to meet you, Phil, as a friend. It's great to see your face again. I did want to mention though, as the musical composer of your theme song, I've always been offended when the podcast starts and your guests never sort of reflect on how great the theme music is. And then I realized as we're recording right now, you guys don't slate in with the theme song. I guess that gets edited in later. So I would like to suggest to your producer, you got to maybe add that in just to get the guests pumped up for the episode. And
well, it's funny you bring that up because Kenny's a big fan of Screen Drafts, which is another podcast.
I was going to mention this too,
and they do play it, and
no, they don't.
They don't.
I had the same feeling. I had the same feeling Jaan did, which was like, it's not really Screen Drafts without the theme, which is the second best theme in the pod game today. A little bit of podcasting magic. Mm-hmm. The first time we got our Jaan Kittask theme song on, I had Ernie play it again, but I got to tell you guys, we didn't actually play it again. I faked it.
I remember that too. Yeah.
It was Run Lola Run. That was the first episode we had it for.
Yes, right. I faked it. I pretended that I listened to it again, but I do deeply love the theme, both themes. I love our 89 theme and our 99 theme. I know Phil doesn't like, overburdening Jaan, but I can't wait till he has to do his 2009 theme. Right. I'm really excited for his 79 theme. That should be an exciting one. The disco one will be good. The psychedelic one for 69 will be good. What are we gonna do? We're gonna do like a Tab Hunter for not Tab Hunter. We'll do like Perry Como for 59. That'll be fun. What's
swing the 9 though. Explain the 9. I mean, I understand 99. I understand so 89. Okay. But are we really going with all the 9s now? Like, are we doing 99?
I don't think so.
No, I mean, silent movies of the 20s.
But what I do like about the 9s,
yes,
is even before 99 turned over to 2000, we got to switch all 4 numbers. Even in Boogie Nights, I love that they had that fulcrum point in that film happen. On the changeover from the 70s to the 80s. I do think for most of our lives, not anymore because we've ruined it and we don't name decades anymore, but for most of our lives, our lives were really had these lines of demarcation with every decade. So it's fun for us to see what was happening at the end of that decade and see how it kind of reflected back on the one that came and looked forward to the one that was about to come.
Ken, I was not expecting such a legitimate answer. That's
I mean,
it all comes back to 1999, I guess.
Look, 99 was a coincidence, but as we've done this for 4 years, a lot of this podcast is about 20th century versus 21st century, about pre 9/11 versus post 9/11, pre Y2K versus post Y2K. A lot of stuff like that have really crystallized itself thematically through this.
Well, I would also say too, when Kenny and I decided that we were going to do a podcast about 1999, I remember specifically texting Kenny and being like, "What are we going to call this thing?" And without even skipping a beat, he's like, "Obviously, podcast like it's 1999." Like you didn't even think about it. And I do feel like, I don't know, it's part of the brand to some degree. So I don't know. We'll figure it out.
I would say though, I mean, and I do sort of buy Kenny's spiel there. And so to go back to 89, it must have been interesting because it's kind of like going back to our childhood.
100%.
But 2009 would be interesting. I don't really know the filmography of that year. Yep. But as you can sort of time travel when you go to 99 and obviously more so from 89, 2009 is kind of like so close to home. It would be interesting to sort of evaluate all those movies in a row to sort of see like, okay, what is 10 years ago or what is 12 years ago? Like how much has actually changed? You know, it's hard to podcast like it's 2019 would be so interesting and like not far enough away to understand what the relevance of 2019 was, you know?
I totally agree.
2019 would not be a film podcast, in my opinion. Just because I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean that there weren't great films, but we crossed the Rubicon into theatrical films being like one of four things. And I think it would get real boring doing tentpoles, Blumhouse, or, you know, Oscar bait. And that's all I can think of as a real fourth
2009
thing.
is interesting. Kenny and I have talked about this because 2009 is the first year when the Academy expands. It's outside of 5. It's sort of a post Dark Knight year where everyone's sort of thinking about those movies being put in a echelon that perhaps is deserved or not.
Post Dark Knight, I think Iron Man is 08 too, right?
Correct.
So I mean, it's not that we would do 08, but it's interesting to see the way those two films, which are, you know, the alpha and omega for what we've been doing the last 13 years. Had their immediate impact in 09. I think 09 would be interesting. And I particularly too. Because it's before Netflix took over and changed the way we watch movies. So that would be relevant to me as a human. I guess I've made the case that we go to 09 next, Phil. Not that anyone would give a shit, but
that's not true. But we're here to talk about Splendor. A movie that
are we ever?
that I'm curious. I mean, here's the thing. I remember when Jaan and I talked about him coming on for this movie, which was quite a while ago, if I'm not mistaken. And I feel like part of the reason that we wanted to talk about it, other than the fact that we're talking about all the movies of 1999, but the soundtrack is interesting. The moment is interesting. I think Gregg Araki is an interesting filmmaker. And it's just sort of, first of all, it's a movie you can only see on YouTube. It's not even available for purchase or rental anywhere.
I think it's actually on Mubi or whatever that one's called.
Is it on Mubi?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, then subscribe to Mubi. But I do think that this movie does sort of live in a space that I kind of forgot about until I hit play on this movie. Like it's this sort of kind of, I mean, it's an indie film in the sense that Gregg Araki is this independent filmmaker for the most part, but it's also trying to be sort of a populist rom-com-y kind of thing. It's also sort of oddly meta at times and doesn't really have much to say about anything, if I'm being completely honest. Like but I kind of liked it. I don't know. Kenny, do you know Gregg Araki's movies?
I was going to say, I have two kind of like 30,000 foot questions. One is for Jaan and one is for both of you. Mm-hmm. The Jaan question is, why Splendor?
I want to hear the next question and then I'll answer that.
The next question is a very basic, like, tell me, it's not a question, it's a demand. Tell me a bit about Gregg Araki. Because Gregg Araki is a Canadian filmmaker, right?
I don't think so.
He's from Los Angeles.
Gregg Araki is a Los Angeles filmmaker. But the only movie I've ever seen of his was Happy Face.
Interesting.
There was a little moment with Happy Face.
Yes.
It had Anna Faris, and for whatever reason, it kind of hit me at that exact moment where I was sitting at home watching everything that came out. So I don't know. I don't think that movie's very good, but I don't know much about him. So I'm interested in your guys' relationships to him and why Splendor in particular. Jaan was the movie I wanted to come on for.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it just sort of occurred to me that Splendor to me was a movie that I watched a couple of days ago. And it's a movie that maybe I saw 20 years ago, but I actually don't remember. And to be honest, I don't remember seeing it a couple of days ago. Like that's kind of the impact the movie kind of left on me. But it was sort of a hugely important movie from 99 because of its soundtrack. Like I remember it was like that was not an important soundtrack, but it was on Astralwerks, which was sort of at the time the sort of like the cool guy record label that would have, Fatboy Slim and Chemical Brothers, but also sort of put out a bunch of shoegaze stuff in the early 90s. So it put out this amazing, so I think I probably only had the soundtrack of the movie, and that's how I knew of it. And, 99, of course, this is pre Spotify and everything. So to get a soundtrack that has that's basically a compilation of all your favorite artists. It's like, that's good value. I don't need to buy
for sure
an album for one song. I got a whole bunch of stuff, and it has we should go over the soundtrack later, but it's it's a pretty impressive list. And for the most part, the soundtrack is actually remixes of popular sort of rock bands by dance artists. So there's a mixture of Fatboy Slim and Chemical Brothers on there. But there's also songs from shoegaze bands like Lush and I think Slow Dive and Blur remixed by Moby and stuff like that. So it's an interesting soundtrack. So I only remember this movie from its soundtrack, and I do own the CD. In '99, I was actually working at a radio station. It was like an internet radio station, and record labels would send us albums, and I remember Astralwerks was one of the labels that would send us stuff to play, and so I guess I got this CD. I'm like, this is awesome, and it actually is a great soundtrack. And it's funny because in the movie itself, these songs are played for 10 seconds, not even. I don't know if you noticed, there's a lot of songs that rapidly sort of get played for a second. So I do think that this movie in some ways was a vehicle for a soundtrack, but
I feel like I missed out on Gregg Araki.
Oh, so Gregg Araki, why I don't necessarily have a big thing with Gregg Araki, but I do know this is not a great movie. It's fine, it's fun, it's kind of a time capsule. It's not a great movie. But Gregg Araki's better known for some earlier 90s movies. There's three movies, I think they're called Teenage Apocalypse. Starting up with Totally Fucked Up, Doom Generation, and Nowhere. And again, Totally Fucked Up was, of the three, the only kind of, I guess, critically kind of good movie. The other two, not so great. But he has an aesthetic. He has a style. He's kind of like a Kevin Smith of the early 90s, of just having that very his own sort of thing, his own.
The movie, by the way, that I've seen is Smiley Face, not Happy Face.
Oh, okay.
Right. I think that Gregg Araki is a really fascinating filmmaker, because I do think that, to Jan's point, he has a very specific visual style, right? There's a vision here, whether or not you're on board with it or not. He's fully committed to a look and a style that I do think is kind of all his own. I can't think of anyone that's as sort of, kind of infused by rave culture and that aesthetic. I think that there's a lot of, very punchy colors, very sort of overproduced sort of production design. It all feels very heightened and surreal. And I think all of that works to his benefit in those earlier films that you mentioned, Jaan, where he's going full tilt, just kind of insane. Whereas with this, it's sort of at odds with itself a little bit, where you're just you're trying to tell a relatively grounded romantic comedy about these three characters. Meanwhile, they're having dinner and there's projections of themselves behind them for reasons that are sort of, hard to explain.
The projections were a weird flex, but
do you think those projections were meant to be a part of that restaurant? Can you imagine?
That's what I couldn't tell.
That would be kind of interesting.
It's the only time that he did something like that, and I think it's actually fair to.
Well, explain that scene for people who haven't it is a very specific moment in the movie. It's
they're at their first date, correct? I believe it's a dinner date.
It's Kathleen Robertson and Jonathan Sayak. I nailed that.
You killed it.
And they're at their first date, and he's. Let's talk about Splendor in a minute, because I'm still kind of on this Gregg Araki thing. Because everything you guys are saying is very interesting to me, because the 90s that we all lived through the 90s, and we all, the cool thing about the 90s were among a bunch of different things was musically there was such an incredible breadth of what was available to you from MTV, from the mainstream, from mainstream radio and things like that. And then even just half a step below the surface, there was another whole, massive amount of stuff that was available to you that was so different from each other. So when you look at 90s movies, there was obviously a lot of mainstream rock. There was always going to be a lot of mainstream rock and a lot of mainstream pop. There was a lot of hip hop and a lot of rap. But I never really saw a rave in a mainstream film until Go. And that was about 4 or 5, 6 or 7 years after rave culture had kind of like, kind of crested. I mean, it was still around, but it was like kind of done. And by 99, shoegaze had kind of, a lot of these rave kids had calmed down and started taking different drugs. And and shoegaze had kind of, poked its head back up, right? Like the second run of shoegaze had kind of come back. And I feel like Gregg Araki, based on what you guys are saying and based on what is on Splendor, because this reminds me more of a 99 than a lot of movies we did. Like, for instance, one that jumped to mind watching it was The Mod Squad, which felt like a fucking hellscape, it felt like the production designer, the sound designer had been listening to like POD and was like, that's what we do now. This movie felt a lot more like what normal people were doing at the time. Not
it feels
the
very
sexual
specific.
politics of it.
Sure.
But the going out of it, the socializing of it, the culture of it. This felt like it, like almost like the song of an unspoken minority of people who were interested in music and culture. So I liked that, and it's a nice counter to a lot of the kind of stuff we were doing that we've been watching and analyzing that have been trying to capture the zeitgeist and just failing.
Well, I think that what you're hitting on, and I totally agree with you, there's a specificity to Gregg Araki's world vision, or however you want to call it. Like, I do think that it's narrow. It's why this film made a whopping $284,000 worldwide. I mean, this movie did not do anything. But I do think that it is hitting something, and I think it's part of what Jaan was talking about as well, like owning the soundtrack. Like, this existed in a universe that was very real and very specific. And I think that makes it, special. I think that makes it interesting, but it also makes it, I think, somewhat, I want to say alienating, I guess, on a certain level as well.
And I kind of think the opposite. I wish it was more alienating. Like, I think some of his other
films are
like
more alienating.
Doom Generation and stuff are like so like ultra violent or sexual or whatever.
Yes.
Like, this seems so like too many studio notes and too normcore and very watered down. Like, this movie is rated R. Why? Why is this movie rated? Like, this could have been.
I don't know.
There's nothing. Yeah. There's no nudity. There's nothing in this.
I agree.
Like, there's nothing like risque about this movie. And so for a movie that's basically about a threesome couple, I mean, there's nothing edgy about this movie. And I don't know if it was supposed to feel any more edgy in 1999, but I mean,
it might have.
I don't know. I'll ride for the MPAA here.
Yeah.
No, I think, I won't ride for them. I understand why it was rated R. I think that this is kind of your classic quote unquote adult situation that they always give R's to. And maybe in the last couple of years they might not have. They might not. But up until like Love, Simon, I think gay themes meant R at queer themes meant R at any point in our history, basically.
I mean, this is like the least queer Gregg Araki movie, I think. And in fact, it doesn't even 100%. Really go into queerness. It's like they make it quite clear that in this threesome couple, the guys don't like, touch each other. Yeah, so
Yep.
It's not. No, it's not. It's certainly.
Which to be honest, right there, that would have made it a more interesting story. Hey, Phil, you should roll us on the storyline. I feel like we always wait too long.
Let me give the synopsis very quickly. But an average, calm, mid-20s girl named Veronica restarts her dead dating life all of a sudden, but with two guys, a sensitive field writer named Abel and an airhead drummer named Zed. At first, she despairs. Then she finds a way to date both without them finding out. Then she tells both of them. Splendor opened on September 17th, 1999 against Blue Streak, For Love of the Game, The Sixth Sense, and Stigmata. As I mentioned, it made $284,000 worldwide. It has 58% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 63% from audiences. Roger Ebert did not review this film, so we don't have his review, but a bunch of people did. Variety stated that though less violent and macabre than all of Araki's previous movies, Splendor is not exactly fresh nor a radical point of departure, a seductively sensual picture that entices while it lasts, but evaporates like an air bubble as soon as it's over. I think that's I think we all pretty much agree with that review.
Yeah.
But I want to sort of say, Kenny, to your sort of earlier thing on the Gregg Araki, because I do think it's worth pointing out, and it's also what Jaan said, that this film is not weird. Like Gregg Araki's previous films are a lot stranger. I mean, there's a character in Nowhere that turns into a giant bug, if I'm not mistaken. Like these movies are far more surreal, far odder, far just stranger. And I think this film could have stood to have a little bit more of that juice in it. It does, to your point, Jaan, feel pretty straight. And I don't mean that as a pun. Like it's just a straight line. It's not really doing anything particularly interesting on a story level. But Mysterious Skin, which I don't know if you guys have seen that film, which was the film that sort of put Joseph Gordon-Levitt into a new category. Certainly made him more of an indie darling. He did Brick shortly thereafter, but is a really interesting film. I think that Gregg Araki, Jaan and I were texting about him yesterday. Like the guy's 61 years old, which I honestly can't believe. He feels like he's 25, frozen in my mind. He made a show for Stars. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago called Now Apocalypse, which I think was 6 or 10 episode, half hours. Yeah, which again, like didn't really make much of an impact. But I do think that the guy, I mean, he did a pilot in 2000, which didn't go to series for MTV, which Jaan and I fast forwarded through on YouTube yesterday, which is a real time capsule of late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, that was called This Is How the World Ends. And it's actually an MTV pilot that was much more edgy than this movie, I thought. And it was like very 2000, very 1999.
Yeah, era. Starring the guy from Roswell, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was one of the aliens from Roswell. But I mean, ultimately, I think what I'm sort of circling here, and I think it's kind of what you said earlier, Kenny, as well. Like, I don't feel like I missed out on Gregg Araki necessarily, but I also feel like either A, he didn't really know how to hit a vein, or B, Hollywood didn't really know what to do with him. But like something got away from him and he never really totally clicked.
I'd love to watch the good films that he did. This and Smiley Face, which, is basically Anna Faris being high for a day and hallucinating all day. Yeah. And it's pretty bad and small, and I kind of hated it. But his quote unquote good films, the trilogy you mentioned, sound really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. The thing that I unfortunately can't kind of get over is how essential it all feels. Yeah,
that's totally fair,
and that's not a great thing for an indie director. So many indie directors should feel like essential. They should feel like little pieces, or in indie films. Great indie films should feel like little pieces of a puzzle that you're putting together that you didn't know you needed. And that's not how this feels. But I do really want to check out the
I would recommend Doom Generation, which I saw back in the day. I never saw
Rose McGowan and
Rose McGowan. And it's like they're essentially kind of, it's got kind of a like Bonnie and Clyde vibe. I think there's also a trifecta threesome situation in that too. But it's much more sort of like, I believe they're bank robbers or terrorists or something along those lines. There's just a little bit more, it's got something to say. It's a cool movie, and she's fucking awesome in it. But
I mean, music always plays an important role in Gregg Araki movies, and Doom Generation, because it was this sort of like darker, more violent sort of tone, had more of an industrial kind of like Nine Inch Nails, Susie and the Banshees. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he's very particular with music that goes into these movies. And so clearly it's like, I know he's like a music guy. Like another YouTube video that Phil and I shared with each other, I shared with him, was I guess Amoeba Records in LA has a, What's in the Bag, where they interview people in the store, and it's like, what are you shopping for at Amoeba today? Oh, yeah. And so it was like a Gregg Araki one from, I don't know, early 2000s. And, he was like literally like had like a shopping list of like CDs that he was going after. And he was talking about, he was like obsessed. And again, I forget, it must have been like early 2000s, but he was obsessed with CD singles. You remember CD singles? And sometimes they would come in like the little cardboard sleeve. And I remember they're like more popular in like England, where you get them for like £1 and, whatever. Mm-hmm. They were sold at the HMV there. But, he was like going through Amoeba looking for CD singles, and he was obsessed with like remixes and weird B-sides and stuff like that. in the Amoeba YouTube thing. He mentioned like Slow Dive. He mentioned My Bloody Valentine. I mean, that was his sort of like essential era of music, I suppose. But he certainly was like somehow like remained sort of contemporary with music throughout his movies and sort of evolved. So I think to me, like 99, hearing like Lush and Slow Dive and My Bloody Valentine, that's like throwback already, even for 99.
To that first run of shoegaze, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
But
can I? This is a question for you, Jaan, and obviously for you as well, Kenny. But like, there's something about remixes that's always felt a little strange to me, right? Like, first of all, isn't it is cheaper to quote unquote buy the remix for soundtracks as well, right? Like, you would find that there'd be like a remix version of the song on a soundtrack as opposed to sometimes the radio single. There's something about remixes.
I don't know if it's cheaper to buy the remix. I think you're talking about a cover.
No, I think you're talking about licensing a song. I mean, for example, this like soundtrack had, like Beetle Bum by Blur, which at the time was like a new song, but they had the remixed version by Moby, which again, it's like on paper that sounds even more impressive, but it's not like you don't get the impact of using the song Beetle Bum in the movie. And in fact, the time they do play the Beetle Bum remix, I mean, you wouldn't even know it was Blur because they don't play any of the vocals. It's just like 2 seconds of like an instrumental portion of that song, right? So, I kind of thought the same thing, but I actually think it's Gregg Araki like enjoys those kind of like B-sides and deep dives into music more. I think that's more interesting to him. So, I mean, just to go over the soundtrack really quickly. I just wanted to like sort of name drop some of the artists. There's like a Slow Dive song remixed by Locust. Suede has The Chemistry Between Us remixed by Lion Rock. There's a Lush song, Sweetness and Light, that's remixed by My Bloody Valentine. So again, on paper, I mean, this looks like an incredible soundtrack. Chapter House, there's the Blur remix. And then there's some of the contemporary songs of that sort of year. Fatboy Slim's Show Enough, which I think appeared in a bunch of movies that year. And Airs, Kelly Watch the Stars. There's some Portishead, Chemical Brothers. I mean, and then of course at the very end, Bizarre Love Triangle by New Order, which is like the exact same beat, I think, in the movie Threesome, which came out like 10 years before. But
correct. Yeah. Can I also just say though, and this says something too, you can't buy this soundtrack. Like, the only way you can buy this soundtrack now or stream this soundtrack, hear this soundtrack, is by buying a used CD somewhere. Like, it's not even possible.
I can't find it on streaming services, but I was curious and I looked it up. It like appears on like Kmart and Walmart websites, so you can still buy a physical copy of the CD.
Wow,
perfect.
Which is how Gregg Araki would want it, I think. So yeah.
By the way, honestly, quite possibly how he wants you to buy it. Yeah, I mean, I vividly remember you owning this soundtrack, Jaan, and playing it for me back in the day. Like, I do remember this was an interesting soundtrack that certainly made an impact on you, but it does feel like he was trying to do something. He was trying to kind of flex the soundtrack thing in a different direction, which I think is interesting. You're not wrong.
It made a movie in order to make a mixtape.
Apparently.
I mean, so he was a writer and director of this movie. And I think a lot of the sort of recurring comment that I see on comment threads about any sort of Araki thing is it's like the aesthetics are so important, and the music and the visual aesthetics are his thing, and maybe writing and directing is not his thing. You know what I mean? But his movies have an aesthetic, and that is consistent throughout everyone. And not every director has like an aesthetic where you can look at it. It's something. It looks like a Gregg Araki movie. It's not a very good movie, but it looks like a Gregg Araki movie.
Can I also say? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, this is totally a tangent. You guys did the soundtrack episode. I didn't listen. I don't listen to our podcast. Did you guys rank your soundtracks?
We did, didn't we? I think we did, Jaan.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
What were your favorite? What was your favorite?
I know that I'm trying to think of. You know what? I can pull up my my document.
I'm trying to pull up my document.
And we're talking soundtrack, not score, I assume.
Yes. No. Yeah. We were talking soundtracks. Let's pull it up because I think we definitely ranked them.
Mine was definitely Go. I listened to Go nonstop and every song on that over and over again because I remember I was obsessed with the movie, saw it twice in a row, and now I hate it.
You didn't hate it. We both liked the first chapter.
I think I just hate my younger self, Phil. But What were your guys' favorite soundtracks? And did this come up?
Are we
in the
talking about
soundtrack episode?
99 or the 90s?
No,
99.
99. But what did this come up in the soundtrack episode? Like, was this something that was front of mind for you guys?
Jan definitely brought this up on the soundtrack episode. I know that the ones that jumped out for me that I kind of hit relatively, Cruel Intentions. For sure. Go, Magnolia. Those were sort of the big
Magnolia,
ones for me.
I think, is my number one. But
I think that Jan
story.
definitely talked about this, if I'm not mistaken, right, Jan? You must have.
I don't remember doing a specific 99 soundtrack episode. I kind of remember, I think to make it easier on us, we just said the 90s. And I think we just talked about like singles and Train Spotting and the good soundtracks.
We talked about 90s soundtracks and then, but the lanes into it was to talk about a couple of them from 99. Cruel Intentions being a big one.
Cruel Intentions is memorable.
But I do think that, and I wanted the movie that I thought of a lot as I was watching this, and I'm curious what you guys think of this.
Oh, I have a 99 Twin City movie as well. No, I got it. I was excited because there was one movie that felt like this movie from 99. But was yours from 99 as well?
No. But what's yours from 99?
No, I'm sorry. You started.
No, I was just gonna say Chasing Amy was a movie that definitely came to mind for me, which was and the reason I kind of equate these two is obviously there's the sexual component of both of these films, but it also felt like both these filmmakers were trying to find the populace a little bit. They were trying to sort of, I don't want to say legitimize themselves, but I certainly feel like they were trying to kind of shrug off some of the, pastiche and things that are kind of attached to them. Like, I feel like both of these films were trying to be grounded. We're trying to be character pieces.
Yeah, I think
from filmmakers that I don't necessarily associate with that.
So Kathleen Robertson, she is Canadian, and she was the lead in this movie. And I thought she was like really like compelling. I thought she was good. Like she was really good. Yeah. But she had just come off of like a big run of 90210. Like she was Steve Saunders' girlfriend or whatever. She was kind of became like a mainstay character on Beverly Hills 90210. So I feel like this must have probably been her, like what was supposed to maybe be her breakout role. I feel like this was like a vehicle for her to sort of get to that next level. I don't think maybe it wasn't effective. I don't know.
She's always been for 30 years. She's always been like right there. Right. Like if Hollywood is a big, archery target, she's kind of been right there on the outer rung, right? And she's always been in the same kind of spot. And I feel like Hollywood's always tried to push her into the middle because she is talented and she is gorgeous and she is intelligent and she is, kind of willing to go anywhere. And for whatever reason, it never really worked, but also never really destroyed her.
Well, I thought she was, to Jan's point, and both of your points, I thought she was quite good in this. I found her quite endearing and very watchable and very charming. She was dating Gregg Araki at the time, who has sort of made it clear that he's sort of sexually fluid, but now defines himself as gay for what that's worth. But I do think that speaks to this film as well, right? Like, I do think that there's something he's channeling a little bit in terms of his affections, not just for her, but sort of like questioning his own sexual identity and what have you, that I do think is a part of this film. I just don't know that he necessarily digs beneath the surface of it. I think he's just sort of like, there. So Kenny, who doesn't listen to the show, but I actually do listen to the show, Kenny, and a couple episodes
thank you
ago,
so much.
Yeah,
thanks,
because there's one thing that sort of stuck in my mind as I was listening a few episodes ago. I think did you guys do Message in a Bottle or something?
We did,
yeah,
of course.
And I remember Kenny was mentioning the sort of classic 99 trope of the oversexed best female friend, and this
this has that for sure.
Oh yeah. Again, it's the girl who's in the threesome and yet she still has the oversexed friend who's
it's so weird, dude. We've been watching all these Razzie films for the screen draft we're about to do.
Yeah.
And when you said the trope of the oversexed best friend, my mind didn't go to was it It didn't go to Message in a Bottle. It didn't go to the one from this one, who was Kelly MacDonald, played the sex best friend.
She was the best
who's a very good actress and is so unwatchable in this film, in my opinion.
Right. Oh yeah.
And it's just a horrible character. No internal life. Only like she's like a scold and a nag, and it's a very bad part. No, Phil, it went to Alex Borstein in Catwoman. So that's where I am right now. who is a hypercharged, oversexed best friend in Catwoman?
Movie. Yeah, that.
But yes, no, it's true. Point is, this never stops. It never stops. It's for some reason like what not necessarily even male filmmakers at large think a best friend is. Yeah. The person who tells you to go get a little strange on the side. It's like,
I also friends. It needs to be said too that I like some confusion about Veronica's character, because like she's sort of this like quote unquote good girl who seems like she hasn't been dating and but is also like fucking guys in bathroom stalls and doing. She
hadn't had sex in 6 years.
Oh yeah, that was interesting because
I'm just like, I don't really understand what's going on.
At one point, it was like mentioned that she was like 22, and then the train spotting friend was like, "You've been dry, like you've been on a dry spell since '93." So I'm like, "You've been dry since you were like 14? This is so weird."
It's strange.
Yeah, that was.
It was like a weird line to sort of mention both that she was 22. Yep. I mean, I'm sure it was a joke that she had a dry spell since 93. But then I kind of did the math and I'm like, well, that's I almost feel like the character, the fact that they mentioned that she's 22 felt like she was like, well, too young to make this an interesting character. And I mean that in that like,
yes.
I don't know. I feel like this character that was too young to maybe potentially get married and too young to have had the experience of realizing I'm so bored in my life that I need to have this like, you know, my cake and eat it too threesome situation. I don't know. Like, I just feel like even if she was like 25 or something, this sort of storyline sort of makes more sense. And I think that Kathleen Robertson was like 26 when they filmed this movie. So she didn't like necessarily like appear to be a 22-year-old either. It was a weird thing that they wrote into the script for some reason.
So that's an interesting little,
especially because she's supposed to have such a grown-up job. And it's like, I don't think 22-year-olds have like the grown-up job that she did, you know?
It's an interesting thing that we've, you know, also obviously noticed in 99 versus today. People in their 20s were expected to act the way I think people in their 30s or maybe even 40s do now.
Quite awesome.
You know, you're supposed to, you know, kind of graduate college and go right into the reality of dating and being a grown up. Whereas we've just kind of accepted as a culture, at least, you know, the, you know, kind of white establishment is as accepted as a culture that 20s are for upper class white kids, time to figure it out. So I
there's the like reality bites sort of thing, right? Of like this like,
yes. And
just
nowadays,
graduated and yeah.
And I don't mean, there are obviously a million fucking, you know, socioeconomic and cultural reasons why this is the case. But nowadays, you know, the majority of college graduates move home and have this extended period of figuring it out, which, you know, not their fault. But I think it would be interesting to do a movie like this today. I think it would be interesting to to not have a 22, 23-year-old act as a grown-up child who's obsessed with childish things and acting like a child, and someone who's actually like earnestly trying to make it and experience new things in an unfamiliar place. I do think that the flattening out of culture that the internet has bequeathed us has kind of destroyed these little niches of people or niches of people who are trying to do it differently, figuring it out.
So what are you saying? Because I think like a show like Girls did that really well, where it showed like young people, how young people really live. And the whole joke was comparing it to like 99's version of young people in Sex and the City or whatever, where it's like so unrealistic. Is that what you mean? Or are you saying we need a representation of someone who's 22 who isn't just like a bum at home or whatever, living at their parents? Who
Girls
is like
the best.
Yeah,
I love Girls. Girls is a lot closer to the modern version, which is great and fine, and they were the first through the gate, and really captured the zeitgeist of the moment and the way kids lived 7-8 years ago. Kids, yeah, I mean, calling them 20-somethings lived. I'm talking about like someone who doesn't really exist on the landscape right now, on the media landscape right now, but undoubtedly exists in the world. Undoubtedly there are. This sounds so privileged and stupid. This is real, that there are people who graduate college who don't go and live at home, who have to go and figure out their lives and every aspect of their lives. And we don't see that on television almost ever now, because that's true. And there's a reason for this. Like, television is written by millionaires who have their 20-somethings living at home, and that's what they see. And they assume that their experience is anachronistic for today's society.
Well, I mean, that might not be the personally right word, speaking,
I've
definitely. I mean, I have pitched many shows that take place in this 20-something period that you're talking about, Kenny, and the pushback that I get in general tends to be, the problem is that high school is where your firsts are, and things are always very exciting in high school. And then when
high school hasn't changed that much.
Right.
The technology's changed and the attitudes changed, but the life experiences and the evolution of,
the rites of passage and what have you. Yes.
To adult, adolescence to adult, it hasn't really changed. Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
So there's a part of me that's just like, feels like the networks want to ignore your 20s because the stakes aren't as high, because it feels as though you're in this sort of quote unquote quarter life crisis of trying to figure out who you want to be. And they find that less stakesy. So they want to skip ahead to when real life hits you and you become, now I don't agree with this notion. I think that that's absurd. I think there's lots of things that happen in your 20s that are very interesting, but I think that's what you're kind of hitting on, Kenny, which is this fear of the 20s to talk about.
The counterpoint is a show like Made, which is great. I'm not knocking Made, but makes everything so heightened and so existential that is something that, a small percentage of the population can relate to that exact experience. A large percentage of the population has somewhere between 1 month and 1 year before they are doomed. And there's something about that experience. Not that I'm doomed, because Margaret Qualley in that show is doomed tomorrow, right? Like, she is doomed yesterday. Yeah. But this idea of like, paycheck to paycheck, more or less, have to watch everything, but I am not about to starve, is an interesting milieu that used to be everything about the 20s. That used to be every movie and every TV show about your 20s. And now there's this like, again, because TV's written by millionaires, people who don't believe that this experience exists anymore, or at least don't have any kind of approximation to it, and it's largely ignored. It is what it is.
I
have one more point, Phil. I have one more annoying point, and I will move on.
Okay.
This is great, by the way. It is incredibly thought-provoking. Like, I mean, there's like, obviously, the economics of being in your 20s today is not what it was in the 90s. Even the late 90s, the outlandish apartments that Felicity, Phil, and I would always joke about, like, how do people like afford these apartments and stuff? But because you could back then, because you could just have more space, the rent was cheaper. Yeah. I mean, there is a difference. And I mean, I think that's it. But I think what you're saying is like, well, people can still be 22 and have a good job. And like, there's a hustle in life, and it's maybe a bit faster or whatever, but that still exists. And no one wants to set a show outside of the 5 major cities in this country either. So it's like, or you're going real rural. You're going like you're making a point about some other part of the country, but no one wants to set a show in Minnesota. What was your last point? I cut you off, Kenny. You had
the last point is, to really bring it full circle. I keep harping on the idea that TV is written by millionaires, and the thing that we are missing now is this: there is no DIY in TV. It doesn't exist, right? There is no way for a Gregg Araki. There is a 1 in 1,000 chance, a 1 in 10,000 chance that a guy like Gregg Araki can produce something independently that becomes a television show. And even when it becomes a television show, it's a television show, for instance, like Now Apocalypse, that's on a Lionsgate owned property that is, instilling all of the trappings of a major studio project. So there's no such like a Gregg Araki, an independent film, probably has something close to Final Cut, probably does have Final Cut, and probably has total creative control to tell the story of his life. And doesn't, even though he was an established filmmaker, there's no way he had a lot of money at that point. There's no way that he was living some kind of, high horse life. He was telling a story that was familiar to him. But the fact that there's nothing like independent film in what is now the dominant media is destructive when it comes to telling stories about the breadth of people in this world. And it's, we're doing better when it comes to diverse experiences a little bit, but diversity, really does go beyond what you look like. And I think allowing people who don't live in Hollywood, who aren't on overall deals, who aren't, people who've been like kind of plucked from Juilliard or wherever, NYU, Columbia, et cetera, from when they were young people, to go out, take a movie camera in their set and figure out a story that, is reminiscent of what they're living at the time is a problem. And this is why, to some extent, people are so excited about foreign television, because it's closer to that. This is why we see so much Spanish language television, Israeli television, Asian television.
I wonder if Araki was trying to make a point of making this movie. So this movie had already existed several times in the 90s. I mean, we had like a Reality Bites,
for sure,
singles with threesome. I mean, this type of movie had existed so many times, but all those movies were like early 90s, and this was late 90s. And I wonder if even then, like, because I'm like, it seems so like redundant, this movie. Like, did we need this movie, at the time? But I wonder if at the time he's thinking like, I need to represent, the youth of 1999 because those movies from like 93 didn't quite get it or something. Like, I wonder if there was enough distance happened.
I think there is something to that. I know that in a lot of interviews, Gregg Araki said that he was actually trying to make an homage to screwball comedies of the 40s and 50s. Yeah. I mean, sure. I mean, the overacting obviously is like, clearly it's very broad. Intentional. It's very intentional. Though. Sure. I mean, I think that specifically with Zed and Abel's characters, which are, particularly very broadly written.
Your man, Sayich plays a pretty good villain and a pretty good asshole, but sweet nice guy he doesn't even know how to channel that.
He doesn't. Yeah, he felt like a bad version of Noel from Felicity in a lot of ways. Like it didn't work.
This brings me back actually to what my like Twin City movie was from '99. So I didn't get to mention it before, but here's a good segue. So to me, kind of maybe what you're explaining is there's like so much exposition just to understand who these characters are because they don't really emote anything. Yeah. They just talk really loud. And did you notice that there's no movement in this movie? They're always just like seated somewhere with a weird set piece behind them and they're just discussing something. So Phantom Menace was my, this felt like Phantom Menace where there's just like, everyone needs to be explained as to what their job is. And they take a seat on a couch and have a dialogue together. And that's like every scene, like even at the quote unquote rave, which is a little bit cheesy at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
They're just standing because they're like slam dancing, but the one person has they're just standing there. There's nothing happening. There's no movement anywhere.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I mean, not to belabor my point about Chasing Amy, but Kevin Smith has a very similar problem as well, which is a lot of static, a lot of locked off shots, and people just talking, and just like medium wides.
It's the writer director issue. You're like, I am writing something, and then direct what
right.
You're just directing this dialogue. That's all you're.
There's also
that's all they're doing.
Not to get into the weeds on a production level, but part of it is also a cost issue, right? Which is when you're doing movement, it costs a lot more money in lighting and in time and in making sure that all. So like, this is one of those things where a lot of independent films don't have a lot of movement of the camera because, quite frankly, it's time consuming and it's hard to do. So they don't do it, but it makes for very flat filmmaking. It makes for movies that don't look very dynamic. And this film looks dynamic. insofar as its production design, its costumes, it's lots of like really nice. I actually think Araki does extreme close-ups really well. Lots of nice pops to various things that I think his editing is very strong. Like all that stuff is there to create a little bit of energy. But to your point, Jan, it's all static. It's not.
But do you know what? So going back to like Totally Fucked Up, which came out in like 93 or 92, which is kind of like the first of his like indie flicks of the 90s.
Sure.
There was like a lot of use of like handheld camera and like the confessional style, which sort of later in the 90s became a thing. Like Reality Bites came out after that, you know, and movies like American Beating, all those movies that kind of had that confessional style. Like Araki kind of like almost invented that, and maybe he adapted it from like The Real World and MTV, and that was like very 92, 91 era.
Yeah.
But it's like I feel like he kind of like established that as an aesthetic in filmmaking in the early 90s, and then never kind of carried through. Like that could have been your
totally
thing,
agree.
man.
I totally agree with you. It's like in a weird way, when this movie starts, voiceover, breaking the fourth wall, blown out lighting, a guy with a barcode tattoo, like it all just feels so of a moment.
Yeah.
And in a way that almost, you know, it's almost like he threw away all this really interesting stuff that felt like was kind of his own in order to make something that was surprisingly down the middle. Yeah. You know, it is interesting. This movie does feel like a weird time capsule, though, in a way that, like, I mean, we've talked a lot about the romantic comedies of 1999, but like this, I have to say, feels, I'd rather watch this than Forces of Nature. Right, I'd rather watch.
Of course, that's a bad movie.
But you know what? I'm just saying, like, just a totally generic rom-com to me. At least this movie's got something, right? Like,
yeah, you know, the really interesting. What was the Twin City movie you were going to say, Jan?
He did.
Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace. He said that's the one that makes him think of.
I thought that
it's
was
the
a
amount
joke.
of. No, I mean,
why'd you say Twin Cities?
No, I just meant like, to me,
like
it
mirror.
felt like this, like a mirror movie.
Oh,
it felt like.
All right, so I'm going to give you an actual Twin Cities movie.
Okay.
That takes place in the Twin Cities.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why. I don't even know why that was my way of explaining my.
No. Because I honestly, I couldn't believe you were going to reference The Very Thought of You. But The Very Thought of You is also a movie about a woman juggling multiple men. And three men. Because in this movie, Kathleen Robertson juggles three men. She's in a throuple with two of them, and then a third comes in who can give her like a hint of normalcy, I guess. The great Eric Mabius.
How do I know? What do I know him from?
He was once married to my cousin's cousin. That's how you know him.
Gotcha.
He was in Cruel Intentions. He was the Gregster in Cruel Intentions. So
that's right. That's
probably that. And then he's done a lot of TV, but it was really that. And he was also on the OC. He was the bad teacher guy who kind of may have sexually abused Taylor Townsend. I love that show. So The Very Thought of You is the straight down the middle. It's very terrible, but straight down the middle rom-com version of this. What's interesting about this movie, and why I think I may like it just a little more than you guys, just a tad.
Which one? You like Splendor?
Just a little more than you guys. I
really
wouldn't say I loved it, but I liked it just a little more because all of these rom-coms, the majority of rom-coms, you know, almost ever, but certainly before like 2015, are told from the male point of view with the male gaze, even when it's with a female lead. Even when you have a female, even with a female lead, the edges are so rounded off, and they're all, you know, editors of fashion magazines, and they're all irrational and hysterical and all these terrible things. This movie to me plays like a pure female wish fulfillment fantasy. I moved to LA, and all of a sudden, three hot guys are obsessed with me. Furthermore,
maybe Mulholland Drive is the better Twin City movie then.
It's
of wish.
You got You gotta watch
Hollywood wish fulfillment. Yeah.
This
You
Twin
have to
City
watch.
thing.
It actually is, but you have to watch Color of Night. Which Color of Night is Mulholland Drive meets The Room. It's unbelievable. But okay, so
Color of Night.
more Razzie films. So the other thing that makes it so feminine gaze,
Yeah.
the other thing that makes it so unusual is that when she breaks up with the two guys, they don't move. When these guys aren't on camera, they aren't animate objects. They are sitting at home together on a couch, pining for her. That's it. Waiting for her to come back, which is, by the way, like a selfish, narcissistic person's dream.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's really unusual to have this movie so firmly kind of implanted in the POV of the female character, the way it is.
Kenny, you're making me like this movie more. That's an interesting perspective, which I didn't really consider. And I mean, to me, all those antics with the guys in the cave, I mean, that was kind of just, I thought the idea of the, gauging up the screwball comedy aspect of it, because there's, all the wacky stuff that they kind of go through. But the idea of the wish fulfillment of like her fantasy of these boys just waiting for her at home is actually brilliant. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah.
It is interesting. And, in a studio movie, in a movie that didn't care so much about like, look, a lot of this movie is told direct to camera with the way you guys are talking about confessional, but I like it with the light ring, and it's just like directly to camera. Kathleen Robertson telling you the story. She doesn't really know what's happening when she's not off screen, so a lot of this has to be projection and narcissistic, wish fulfillment and all that stuff. A worse movie would have those guys go out and start fucking. That's just what would happen in almost any other movie, and I don't think this would have been that interesting either, by the way. Would have gone E2 Mama Tom DM with the two of them. Right? And it just feels like that's what you would have done. But I think the restraint that he shows reflects how strongly he identifies with his protagonist in this film. So I just think in that respect, again, like that elevated a mostly flat, barely competent film to something higher for me, because I do think that this is, an interesting subversion. And then just the last point, in 99, I loved Cruel Intention, as everybody knows, but the lesbian kiss is an interesting cultural touch point, right? To have two high schoolers have a lesbian kiss really plays on this idea of, in the 90s, lesbian or gay, but really lesbian pornography had just rushed the mainstream. This idea of this is what the bros love, right? And to invert that, have a threesome where it's the woman and two men, and it's not played as some kind of gay panic situation where, God forbid, our penises should touch in the middle of this, threesome, which is really only, there's a little bit of that, but like not a lot, and only from one character. Right? Is kind of, it's bold. I like it. I'm impressed by it. It makes this movie valuable. And it would be more valuable if it was a kind of a more thrilling film otherwise. But
first of all, I totally agree with everything you're saying. And I also just want to piggyback on it and say that I don't know how this film necessarily was delineated to the world in terms of whether or not it was used as a marketing ploy, the fact that it had a threesome, the fact that it had this throuple at the center of it. But the impression I get from the way Gregg Araki directed it is that it's not a shtick. It's not a bit. Like it's not used as some sort of a gimmick. I think that you know what I mean? And I think that that's also something that's worth noting, because I think at the time, I think that might very well have been
this is what I'm getting at. Yeah. This is exactly what I'm getting at, Phil. You're hitting on it. A threesome with a man and two women in the 90s, in the 2000s was highly marketable. Yep. You would use that as a way to bring people into the audience, at the possibility of, woman on woman titillation.
Sure.
It was not a threesome in this sense. One woman and two men was not marketable then.
No.
It wasn't marketable in the aughts. It wasn't marketable in the teens, and I don't think it's marketable now. Right? Like I still think, at least in America, there is so much latent, homophobia and masculine issues about sexual identity. And I think that extends to a lot of women in this country too, with the way they look at men and and masculine roles and all the shit we're seeing from women on the right. I just very, very quickly, it should be said, just to highlight and underline what you're saying, that Urban Dictionary, when a threesome is between two men and a woman, it's called the devil's three-way, just for what it's worth. So I think that says something. There you go.
Anyway, continue what you were saying.
That's what I'm saying. I just don't think it's marketable. That's really what it comes down to.
It is funny.
And it's interesting. Well, just say one more thing. It's interesting that I work, the show I work on it happens to be on Stars, is a sexual show. It's a dance show, and we have gay characters in that show. And we actively try to treat all sexual situations not the same in terms of their construction and what they mean, but in terms of their effects on the marketing.
Sure.
In terms of the way that they affect people coming in. We don't try to, no one has ever said, a lesbian relationship is less valid or less marketable, less interesting than a relationship between two gay men. We don't do that. But I get the sense over and over again that it is from people who are doing this stuff, people who are selling these shows. We have a lesbian couple on our show, zero pushback. Gay couples, there's some pushback. It just happens. It's just the way it still is. And we're at our most enlightened time ever. So.
What were you going to say, on? Did you have something before?
I think I was going to bring up the movie Threesome again, but only to point out that it was, the whatever the marketing tactic, which I guess was just like a poster and a soundtrack, and that's also what Threesome did with Laura Flynn Boyle, and I think it was one of the Baldwins and Josh Charles. Right? Josh Charles, yeah. But it's an identical poster, basically the identical soundtrack. I mean, it's a weird rehash that this basically the same movie happened twice, and then a bunch of other different versions of it or whatever. But I did have a unrelated question. I was just thinking about what is a music supervisor's job in the film biz?
Are you asking us? I mean, I can only speak. You guys
are in the industry.
I can only speak from it on the television side as opposed to the feature side. But on the TV side, I mean, it's what you would expect. I mean, I'll also say that it's changed relatively dramatically over the last, I would say, 15 or 20 years, insofar as that.
I don't know what it was before this. So,
well, I just mean back in the heyday, if you will, of music supervision, which was probably, your Josh Schwartz shows to some degree or another, where you could get big bands, you could do soundtracks, you could do all that stuff. It was quite lucrative. The problem is that the music business, for all intents and purposes, is kind of they cost too much money now. So most of the music supervision now is bands no one's ever heard of. Not that it's bad music, but it just doesn't have the same punch that it used to.
Right, but in response to your question, Jaan, because I've been on almost every show I've been on has been music heavy, where we've had really, really great music supervisors, and we've been able to use a lot of good music. Music supervisor's job is to take the budget and find out what songs you can fit into the show and where you do it. So it's basically they put the edit together. They say we're gonna have a song here or a score. I mean, like you don't know. Like they work with the composer, but we're gonna have some piece of music here, and generally, in the mix or before the mix, you're given several options. They play the song along with the visuals, and usually the showrunner picks what they want. They think
or in this case, Gregg Araki too, which obviously he had he has such a clear taste in music that appears in all these movies. But I was also curious. I looked up this music supervisor that he sort of seems to work with a lot. This guy Howard Parr. who's like an English guy, but moved to LA in I think 1977. I mean, this music. I was just so curious and started reading up on this guy who like back in I think 1979 or 1980 opened a club in Silver Lake, was booking bands like The Clash and was kind of opening the doors to Brit music in LA at the time. And I mean, there's certainly some weird crossover with this guy Howard Parr, who's the music supervisor of this movie, and sort of Gregg Araki's musical taste. This guy did Big Lebowski, Dogtown, and Z-Boys, Party Monster, movies that are you would think music is a big part of those movies. So I was just curious, because knowing that Gregg Araki obviously has such a big role in choosing the music in a movie like this, I wonder what the role of Howard Parr is, and is it securing the rights to that music, or is it also choosing some of that as well?
That's some of it, but I'd say this: the way we're able to talk about movies, go back hundreds of years and go into every genre, and even if we don't know of it, and kind of have a sense, you have to have that kind of breadth with a music supervisor, for so many reasons. But for Entourage is a good example, because when we had sky high budget, there was almost nothing we couldn't get. The only reason we couldn't get something is if the artist said no under no circumstances, but the money wasn't really an object. Man. So our music supervisors had the entire history of music, of recorded music to go from, which is you go to Jane's Addiction, obviously. So that is one kind of music supervisor, which I think seems like it's kind of the easy version. The harder version is the give me something that sounds like Jane's Addiction, but isn't Jane's Addiction, but isn't going to feel like a Jane's Addiction, isn't going to feel like a Jane's Addiction knockoff, and isn't going to be embarrassing. Give me something that is also cool. So that's more, I think, Phil, what you're saying is that's more where we are now. Yeah. Sometimes you can pull in one big song an episode, or a couple big songs a season. But on the show that I'm on now, on Step Up, we're very rap heavy, hip hop heavy, and it's mostly Atlanta musicians that nobody knows. And then we have Neo on our show, so Neo will write 4 songs for us. Mm-hmm. But that's it. It's changed a lot now. But you still have to have that incredible breadth of knowledge. You still have to have wouldn't it be great if we put this random ass fucking television song here, but you can't get it, and you need something really fucking specific.
Well, is that why a movie like this might not exist on because it's why would Netflix want to pay for this movie that nobody really wants to watch, but especially because it has such a heavy soundtrack? Does that make it more expensive for a streaming platform to carry a movie like this, or is that not how it works? I know with the whole Dawson's Creek thing that you guys have discussed, where they swapped at the soundtrack for that as soon as it appeared online. But how does that work for a movie like this?
I actually don't know the answer when it comes to features. My assumption is that it does play into it to some degree or another. I know that some movies, Kenny and I were just texting about this the other night because of the Razzies, but Showgirls is nowhere to be found either. It's not streaming anywhere. You can't rent it. You can't buy it. So, I don't know why that happens. I don't know if it's a music rights thing. Generally speaking, it's if there's multiple producers involved and they can't all get on the same page as to how much they're getting paid for it. Sure. But I also wanted to just to Kenny's point just now about the television music supervision. When I was on Station 19, Grey's Anatomy was that was a big soundtrack show. There were big artists off that.
They even put out a soundtrack for that.
They put out several soundtracks, several volumes. Yeah. That was, I would argue, kind of the last.
Still on, by the way?
Yes. Grey's Anatomy or Station 19?
So Grey's Anatomy is still a show?
Yes. Season 17. So I that was the last show that I can think of, and Kenny, forgive me if you can think of another one, that felt like you still had big artists, you were still putting out soundtracks, and this was kind of the last gasp of that thing. Because I can tell you that on Station 19, there was never an artist I had ever heard of before. On every episode that I had written, or every episode that I was involved with, it was exactly what Kenny was saying, which is, we know what we want this to feel like. So go find us an artist that will pull at heartstrings or will, whatever.
It's interesting. I almost want to kind of run through my career because the the 5 shows I've worked on have almost been a trip through the last 15 years of music use. Like, and I'm going to run through it. So
Get the
but
notepad
it's interesting the way it's just changed and just subtly because, on Entourage, it was, you could write in the script, I want to put Seven Nation Army, and we'd get Seven Nation Army. So there were things like that. And that was different. And then I worked on a show called The Hustle, which was on Fuse. And it was a rap show where we had a lot of original music, but also no problem getting big fucking rap songs on that show either. Right? Like that wasn't an issue. Now, from the next show I was on, which was Hindsight, which was on VH1, I have
let me pause you. Let me quick pause. I do want to, because you have now Jack White, instead of licensing Seven Nation Army, which of course he is writing original music for a video game, right? So like now they get their own. So video games is a whole other category because it seems like there's a lot more money running through those corridors. But go on, number 2.
So the Hustle. My sense is it was similar to the deal, which I wasn't very involved with post on The Hustle at all, so I don't really know what went down there. But on Hindsight, which was on VH1. I know that we had almost unlimited access to the music libraries of Universal and someone else. And it was a 90s set show. And any fucking 90s song we wanted, we pretty much could get on there.
What year was this? When you were
this was 2013, 2014, 2015, something like that. I don't think those deals are made anymore. The deal I'm talking about where you got these blanket rights to like the catalog where it was like straight up, you want to put a U2 song in here? Here's a U2 song. You want to put a Red Hot Chili Pepper song? Here's a Red Hot Chili Pepper song. We wrote in that thing. We wrote in something to Breakfast Tiffany's. Here it is. Like there's just things like that where we would write music into the scripts and we would get it without much of a problem.
Well, I would also say too, like for the Sleepy Hollow pilot, it's specifically, we were told these are the songs that are available within at the time the 20th library. So these songs will not cost us any money. Pick one of these songs. And that's kind of what seemed to happen with Hindsight to some extent. There were certainly ones that were X'd out. But and then
is this having to do with like network TV versus like I have not watched the new Wonder Years, but I know that the old Wonder Years, obviously music was such a big part of that show. And I know that was like a big issue with having that show come back to even like have reruns air. I wonder, is the new Wonder Years taking music as seriously? I mean, how do you have a nostalgic show without having the music of that era?
They must be. And I think and I don't worry about other G shows. The other
we're taking little gaps in between.
No, it's not even that issue because on Sun Records we it was all Johnny Cash and Elvis, and we also had access to that. Like it was just like it wasn't hard to get that stuff either, and all the Memphis stuff and the Chess Records stuff that we just got whatever we wanted. This was only like 5 years ago, and it's only now that it starts to feel like you're not going to get the music you want.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up, Kenny, because I do feel like I had a meeting a little while ago with a production company with Imagine, because they want to do a show about perhaps about Atlantic Records, because they have the rights to Atlantic Records music. So it's like now we're retrofitting. Now we're going backwards. Now we're like, well, I've got access to this pile of music. So how do I make a show about that pile of music? Which is just like insane. But I do think that there's still a world where a show, this is just guessing, I haven't seen it, but a show like the Wonder Years, that's built in to the budget going into it. We are going to need $1 million an episode to secure the rights to this music. I'd also say the music rights that they're securing, which I think is like 80s music primarily, not the same. It's not the same as like the Forrest Gump soundtrack, which is pulling, the biggest fucking 40 songs ever made. The fucking boomerest soundtrack that's ever been.
There is something about 80s music where I think those artists will take their $10,000 for the use and be very happy with it. So, and I think that might have been true for the 90s to some extent, if you're not going for the giant people.
I mean, you're asking an interesting question, John, because I do feel like, Kenny and I, over the course of this, of the many episodes we've done on 1999, we've talked a fair amount about music, about needle drops, about the various things that exist in these movies. And they really do. I mean, they plant a flag really deep. It's why people were so obsessed with, Paula Cole not being at the top of Dawson's Creek. I mean, it's like the nostalgia can't really fully form until you have these music, these needle drops. And I would also say too, Kenny and I have talked about this a lot, but score and music, maybe more so than any other part of a film, tells the audience how to feel. And if you watch something without score, you'd be surprised how discombobulating and disconnected you feel from it. And I think that that's why it's just so important. I feel like this movie, if you didn't have these various artists playing in the background, despite the fact that they go by very quickly and maybe they don't make as much of an impact as they could, I still think they're incredibly important.
It is funny because that the follow-up Araki pilot that is on YouTube that yes. I recommend watch. It's just like a weird, funny thing, but it was like an MTV produced thing in which apparently the budget was slashed and he didn't get to do what he wanted and the show didn't get green lit. But music played such an important role in that too. And I in the opening credits, it said like, featuring the music of, and then all these like bands like Garbage, Smashing Pumpkins, and they're huge bands of the time, Chemical Brothers, whatever, Radiohead, all sort of flashed by the screen really quickly. And there's, and this is when a channel like MTV would create a show as still a vehicle to push music, not the other way around, not just like a music station, just like, music was still part of the conversation. And now it's sort of, it's too expensive or it's whatever else, No,
100%. It's, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, Kenny, but I'm interested to hear. MTV feels like one of the biggest wasted opportunities that exists on television right now, if you ask me. Like, I don't understand how they let scripted television kind of slip through their fingers. I think that they've somehow, there's this enormous cultural impact that network made on our adolescence. And it's completely, it doesn't exist. I mean, there's nothing on that network that anyone watches down here that I can think of, really. And it's part of Paramount Plus now, sort of, some of it. It's just, I'm baffled by how that happened. It just seems insane to me.
This is my best guess is it's such an uphill battle for basic cable now to be relevant.
Yes.
I couldn't ever conceive of my kids putting on MTV. Ever. But I couldn't conceive them putting on ABC. I couldn't conceive them like we watched Survivor, which I love, and there was there are always ads for the new show Ghosts, and my kids are like, that looks like a good show. That looks good show, and they have no idea how to watch it. They have no idea how to access this show. They're like, how would we even get there? How would we even get to it? So that's like, you think, I think that is that anecdote speaks to just how fucked this whole industry is. If my 9-year-old children who know how to get to every fucking corner and crevice of the internet have no idea how to watch a fucking giant CBS show.
It's I mean, it's absolutely the perfect anecdote to what I'm speaking of. And it speaks to just sort of, I mean, the generational chasm that exists right now is pretty shocking when it comes to content to some degree or another, or at least how they watch stuff. But I do feel like, Jaan and I watched this pilot from the year 2000. That's obviously, 21 years ago. I couldn't, you speak of, I can't imagine my kids watching something on MTV. I can't believe that MTV is as irrelevant as it is. Like, I can't believe that this thing that felt like a bearing wall of culture has somehow become,
they missed the boat. They're Blockbuster, dude. That's just what it comes down to. They missed the boat. And I can't blame anybody because we saw it coming, but they had the opportunity. Yeah. 6, 7, 8 years ago to frankly do what WWE did and start their own online network and start to see this world of people who are accessing MTV.com instead of looking for them on the radio, on the television dial, which no one does.
Yeah.
And at this point, they're done. They're irrelevant. Just like Blockbuster missed the fucking, DVDs by mail. And within 5 years, we're done and irrelevant. So I don't think it's so much a issue about MTV's programming, which it might be, but like I don't think it's about their programming really. I just think they exist in this fucking wasteland that no one accesses anymore.
I also just want to say one other quick thing. I agree with what you're saying, but I also feel like there is something that connects all the things we're talking about here, and that company is Viacom, and that is a company that really missed the boat when it comes to the technological advancements of the other studios. CBS was so behind the 8 ball when it came to, creating CBS All Access, creating now Paramount Plus, getting into the streaming world. They've just been incredibly slow. And I think, unfortunately, MTV was purchased by an older company that got swallowed by this kind of ancient headspace, if you will. So all this being said, to wrap up Splendor, I do want to very quickly talk about the end of this movie, which is that exactly. Yeah, exactly. Basically, Veronica is pregnant. She decides she's going to marry the guy who's stable, the guy who can provide for her and her children, or child at the time. We thought it's one. It turns out, spoiler, there's two.
Twins.
Twins. You don't know anything about that, right, Kenny?
I know everything about it. I watched Cocktail.
What? Anyway, so Abel and Zed are, sitting on the couch, and they decide, fuck it, we're gonna chase after her, and we're gonna stop this wedding from happening because we love her, and whatever. So they run to this wedding, very fucking, they literally scream on the top of a fucking balcony, very much like obviously The Graduate. They both jump off of this balcony into the pool, but yeah.
To do this after Wayne's World 2. Guys, it's over.
I feel like Wayne's World 2 is probably how I probably saw that before. I saw The Graduate.
I did.
So I think I retroactively went back and watched The Graduate, thinking of why it was ripping off Wayne's World. But,
Well, I remember watching it in the theaters with my parents and being like, they're doing The Graduate. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is an important moment in this movie. This is a groundbreaking scene. I've never seen it like,
shut up, Mom. Yes. Shut up, Dad. Yeah.
There's also someone.
Is this not our first movie that did this? Didn't the other sister do this?
Yes, the other sister did this as well.
So there's also one person, an actor credited as Mike's stupid boss in this movie. And it's funny because you can find it's like a 10-second clip online as a cameo from this actor. But then I was texting Phil, I'm like, I don't think this would have been a cameo. It was Adam Carolla was in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think Adam Carolla had any status in 1999. I think that was just a good guy. A good part, yeah. Which I believe Man Show also started in 99, which is thinking back then, imagine in 99 telling yourself that Jimmy Kimmel was going to become one of the most successful talk show hosts.
and one of the most progressive and woke talk show hosts.
Is that true?
You ask me, is it true?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're being facetious.
Oh no, I'm being 100% facetious. He would have public fights with Trump. Jimmy, and then it came out, and they it didn't come out, but people started throwing the Man Show clips, and they're like, "No, dude, you're a misogynist." He's like, "I was a misogynist."
Yeah, right.
But
Kenny, do we have to do an episode on the Man Show?
I was just looking it up. I was hoping to God it didn't start.
It was June 16th, 99. I think we might have to do the pilot, Oprah
Man Show with. Who are we going to do the Man Show with? Who is going to come?
We'll find someone for the Man Show.
Look at this Adam Carolla cross. I bet you Adam Carolla is as relevant now as he was in 99. So maybe he can do the Man Show.
By the way, we could get Adam Carolla, I feel like. No, we couldn't. No. Do we want Adam Carolla?
I'm not saying we couldn't, but he is not the most woke progressive talk show host in America.
So anyway, the end of this movie, they race there. They jump in a pool. They tell Veronica that they love her. She decides to end up with them. She has twins. Credits.
And that whole end scene, I just feel like it could have been written for I think they're trying to get a good laugh out of it, and it's just like it was so badly written. The guy, they're like, what are these guys doing here? It was just like, it does seem like there was maybe about like halfway through the movie that I don't know if the writing, directing, everything, he kind of just gave up. It's kind of fun.
100%.
The beginning of the movie, it builds, and you're getting into it. The end of the movie, you're just waiting for the movie to end because
I'm impressed he resisted the urge to have one have dark hair and like a full head of dark hair, and the other have a full head of bleach blonde
one
hair.
with frosted tips.
Yeah.
I also think too, I couldn't find the budget for this film online for whatever reason. This movie also really feels like it gets real. The budget for this fucking finale, man, of like this wedding that. There's nary a wide shot. You can't really tell what the fuck you're even looking at.
Like they couldn't even cast extras because I think you only see like 3 people at a wedding.
It's
because
crazy.
There's like really tight shots. There's no establishing shot of that wedding.
You can't see anything.
That scene is a disaster. I totally agree. What I like about this film in so many aspects is just how sparse it is. I think that it does feel very staged. It almost feels like they built this shit out in a warehouse. With just what you need. Almost like fucking what's the Lars von Trier movie with Nicole Kidman?
Oh my God, Dogville?
Almost like Dogville, where it just felt like there's just these sets hanging down in a way. Yes, exactly. We're very close to that in this film. And anytime they go outside of that and they try to build out a little world, it can't help but feel like you see where there isn't a budget, like less of a choice and more like something brought upon them.
Let's rank this movie because I want to talk to Jaan about what we're doing next week. So I had not seen this film in '99.
Are we doing before and after rankings?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have a vague recollection, and forgive me because Kenny, I know I've said this a lot. I have a vague recollection of seeing this in a video store I worked at. So like, I'm sure I saw bits and pieces of this movie, but didn't sit down to actually watch it until yesterday. I didn't hate this movie by any means. I would give this movie like a 59 coming into this podcast. Like I think it's got some good stuff. It's got some good performances. I think what we were talking about thematically, I think it has something to say, which most romantic comedies don't really. And I appreciate what Kenny was talking about in terms of how gender roles were handled in a pretty nuanced way. So I'm going to stick at 59. I feel pretty good about that number. But what about you, Kenny?
Phil, we're often so close on these things. What did I sorry, I didn't even have this up.
You wrote down your number. This is impressive.
I do. I wrote down my number. I gave it a 56.
There you go.
And the reason I'm kind of, surprised, Phil, that we're so close is I feel like the 50s are our most neglected series of 10s in this podcast, because there is something interesting about a movie you would give 50 to 59.
So it's below 50 unwatchable? Is that, or where does unwatchable start?
The 50 line is where we say like recommend or not recommend is what we kind of say.
Unwatchable is like, for me, it's below 20.
Yeah.
But then below 10 is watchable again, right?
Yeah.
Below 10 you got to see this shit. I'd say like 20 to 50 are varying degrees of like, I did not like this.
Yeah.
20 to 30 is probably it made me mad. 30 to 50 would be like, it just isn't really working. 30 to 40 would be, it's not working. 40 to 50, it's not working for me.
Yeah. You have a fair amount in the 40s. I feel like the 40s are where you kind of sit when you're like,
well, because I understand that my tastes don't necessarily align with the tastes of, film critics or modern film criticism at large. So I like to kind of put things in the 40s if I want to make like, this isn't really working for me. It's not really necessarily a bad film, but it's just not really working for me. This is the opposite. This is not a great film, but it's working for me. So I think I could see the quiet ambition, and I'm happy I saw it. And I definitely I didn't end this movie thinking this was a bad film. I thought this was, he wasn't shooting for the stars, but this was a worthwhile endeavor. So 50, I gave it a 56. I'm going to go to a 59 with you, Phil, because I think 59 is what I feel.
Jaan?
Guys, I like 59. I like it. I feel like I don't remember having ever seen this movie. I'm sure I did, like maybe Phil said. But I found myself, I was like, I wanted this movie to be good. I certainly wanted it to be better, but I was kind of like, I was like cheering on for I'm like, okay, like I'm making a list. I'm like, okay, Kathleen Robertson's really endearing. I like some of the musical cues. I like some of the weird like 99 set pieces. I like the nostalgia of it now. I was certainly going out of my way to like find the things that I would like, I kind of enjoyed as I was watching it. However, after the sort of like 60% point of the movie, it just became so boring because it's just like you just knew everything that was about to happen, and it just wasn't done in an interesting way. So, it really just kind of falls off there. But going into it, it's a nice little time capsule movie.
So are you in the 50? Are you 59 with us as
well?
Oh
yeah. So let's go with 59. Let's be be a threesome about this.
So next week, Jaan, we are doing New Waterford Girl with yes. So Kenny and I did an episode where we watched the film and we talked about the film obviously, and then we did an interview with Leanne and Tara to talk about the making of the film and what it was like.
Tara actually lives down the street from me in Toronto.
That's really funny.
Wow.
That's
and actually, funny. I used to live. This is weirder. I used to live in a house with her. She was like in the below apartment and I was the upstairs apartment. That's amazing. And she's still, and every time I see her, I have to reintroduce myself. Like she has no idea who I am. I have all these, I'm like, my good friend Leanne was in a movie with you. We literally used to live in the same house. She's like, oh, hey. And I'm like, oh, fuck.
Actors, man.
But I want to hear, so you guys are doing New Waterford Girl. So you taped it. Hasn't
we
aired
already
yet.
Taped it. Yes, it has not aired yet. It will air after this episode.
Okay.
The reason I wanted to talk with you about it is obviously, we are very close friends with Leanne.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, I'm sure, have you watched the film since 99? I know we all went to see it when she was in it, but
I have, I think do
you have a recollection of it at all?
It has been on TV. I think I've just sort of seen it pass. I mean, I own it. So I've certainly watched it after the fact. I think that movie has aged tremendously well. I think it's a great movie. Is this not where?
No. I think that Kenny and I both. Yeah, we would say both of us really liked everything except for the predatory teacher trying to have sex with his student.
Oh, right. McCarthy. What's his name? Andrew McCarthy?
Andrew McCarthy.
Yeah. Right.
We would say everything
Juno
else is
there, yeah. I totally forgot about him even being in the movie, actually. So that's fun, yeah.
But everything else about it, I think Kenny and I really liked. And I thought we had a really great conversation with Leanne and Tara about that notion and what that sort of says about that time and how we've sort of maybe learned something about it, but maybe not as much as we'd like. Like, I still think that, Kenny and I talked a lot about
so when I said that it aged really well, I think I've seen it probably like 10 years ago. So maybe I do need to rewatch it
That
again.
wasn't a judgment. Truly, I think 90% of the film is solid.
From a filmmaking perspective, it absolutely has. And most of the content has too. I think, not a lot of people know it, but it is on the kind of leading edge of a lot of these, female empowerment films and female empowerment indie movies that happened in the 2000s and later. And I think that's kind of why it's good. But,
I really look forward to it. So actually, I got to bring Leanne into Splendor now because it was with Leanne and we co-hosted this radio show together. So we would have received, we did receive CDs together because they were sent to a studio addressed to our show. And so we often would sort of fight over who got to keep what or whatever. So I don't think Leanne particularly wanted the Splendor soundtrack. So I do own the Splendor soundtrack because it did come. So it just says something about her musical taste. But I do recall on our show, we definitely together played a couple of tracks from that album.
They were both absolutely lovely in the interview that we did with them. It was a great interview. It's a really interesting movie. I think that we I know that I was excited to rewatch it. I have not seen it since 99 probably. And it was just really nice to talk with Leanne about, like, I mean, Jaan, obviously you remember her auditioning and her trying to get this role and how crazy and cool it felt for her to get this thing. And yeah, it was just.
You guys should have had Alan Moyle on the show. That guy is fun. Yeah,
I'm sure he would have had lots to say. But more than anything, Jaan, we want to thank you not just for being here, but for everything you do for our podcast. I mean, the theme songs and the artwork and all this stuff. It just would not be the same without you. And we're so thankful to have you on. Finally, both of us together to talk about a movie.
I know. Thank you, guys. This has been a real honor.
No,
I mean, I know in that that we finally get to be together is what I meant as a threesome. Yeah, but no, it's been.
I've been waiting for this day for 4 years.
I have too. Have you guys been doing this for 4 years?
Yep.
I bet we're.
How are there still movies from '99? What?
This might be close to our exact 4 years. It was November.
Yeah, that's what I think. It was November.
Yeah, it was November.
How are there still movies? Because it was the height of studio output, and it was also the height of indie output. And then
I feel like this was not on your list. I feel like I brought this to your attention.
No, this was on the list.
It's on the list.
Okay. It's all on the list.
And the other thing that like we've noticed is this is there even like small things like all right, so big studio output, big indie output. There used to be one family film a year. There are like 6 or 7 this year. There used to be maybe 1 or 2 relevant documentaries every decade. There are like 10 this year. There are like big indie, there are big foreign films, just like that still have a cultural impact. It's like we got lucky. And, in some respects, like, I wonder if we would have found all these gems in every year. But like, I know there's no other year that has Toy Story 2 and Iron Giant and Stuart Little and wait, there are more. And Stuart Little and fucking
this is such a weird list right now.
What's yes, I'm trying to do all the kids films that came out this year.
Tarzan
and Doug the movie and Tarzan and Phantom Menace and the Kurosawa, not Kurosawa. Wait, with the
Princess Mononoke,
Miyazaki. Miyazaki film, and it's just there's so, and which isn't really a kids film, but still there's
a real stretch here, Kenny, with your kids list. I mean, my kids kids movies,
But even animated films,
Princess Mononoke is a great movie.
It's an animated film, not really a kids film, and so is South Park, which is an animated film, not really a kids film that you don't get in any other year. So it's crazy. Like the amount of stuff is just crazy, and to some of my favorite films of this year are films I'd never even heard of. And I don't know.
I think that, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, actually, Kenny, about how, I've been exposed and seen movies now through this podcast that I definitely wouldn't have seen otherwise. And it's actually been a real gift in terms of just seeing all these weird nooks and crannies that exist within this year. So it's been a thrill, and also just, reappraising movies and we talked about Girl on the Bridge, Kenny, which is a movie that hard to find, but easily one of our favorite films of the year. Just really, really great stuff. And, Splendor is another one where you're like, yeah, you got to fucking watch it on Mubi or YouTube or whatever. But yeah, it's great. And
I got to get in on the 89, and I've already pitched you on how to get ahead in advertising.
Yes, we're going to have you on. I texted Kenny about it. You'll be on for how to get ahead in advertising.
I was not super into it.
He was not.
Until I watched.
You already watched it?
Until I watch Hudson Hawk, and I'll go anywhere with Richard D. Grant. But
all right, well, we also have to do With Nell and I before we in context. You got it.
I need to do With Nell and I in general. It's been on my list of movies to watch.
But you can't watch How to Get Ahead without With Nell. Anyway, this is we're
gonna do it, and we've talked about having Leanne on as well. So you and Leanne for How to Get Ahead in Advertising.
She was in a movie with Richard D. Grant.
She was.
Yeah, it was like a CBC made-for-TV movie.
Sweet.
I got to meet Richard E. Grant. He's like my hero. It was fascinated.
All right, this has been great. we have completely gone off the rails. Yeah. But thank you so much again for coming on, Jaan, and we can't wait to have you back.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, bye.
Oh, guys, cue the theme song. It's about to happen.
1999 podcast like it. You want a podcast like it? 1999.